Tez Johnson's time at Oregon has officially come to an end as he has entered his name into the NFL draft. That's in the past. What about the future? And what about the question, who fills the void in this Ducks passing game that Tez left behind? This is That Show Out West. Welcome to That Show Out West for That Team Out West, an unbiased, neutral observer's view of Oregon Ducks football. I'm Ted LaRue. Boy, they say big things come in small packages. Big production came in maybe a small stature for Tez Johnson in his 2 years with this Oregon Ducks program, and what an impact he certainly made. Standing at 5'10", weighing 160 pounds. Hey, maybe for what he lacked in size, he certainly made up for in speed, in explosiveness, in athleticism, in playmaking ability for the Oregon Ducks. Over 2,000 yards in his 2 seasons on campus in Eugene. And you kind of go back to that first season he had on campus transferring in from Troy in 2023. He had 1,182 yards. He had 10 touchdowns each of these 2 seasons. So he had over 1,100 yards and 10 touchdowns. You might think on the surface, yeah, that's certainly all conference. That's an all-conference level. Well, when you had the talent that you did in the Pac-12 in 2023, that did not earn him first team or second team all Pac-12. Remember, at Oregon, you had Troy Franklin, who had over 1,400 yards receiving that season. So there was a lot of talent. It was one of the best seasons in Pac-12 history, certainly for a reason. So it kind of says a lot about the Pac-12 that year. In the Big Ten in 2024, he did not equal that production. He had less than 1,000 receiving yards. Maybe the ball was spread around a little bit more with Dylan Gabriel and this Oregon offense in their first season in the Big Ten. Second team All Big Ten performer. And hey, you can look back on a lot of great moments throughout these last 2 years for Tez, and there's certainly a lot. But man, I just love that Big Ten championship. No one could cover him. Penn State couldn't cover him. Once he caught the ball, he was slippery. They couldn't bring him down. And once he got into space, right, it was a microcosm of really what made Tez Johnson great and what made him such an impact and big player as a part of this offense. Because man, once he got the ball, they just couldn't touch him. They couldn't touch him. Over 180 yards in that Big Ten championship game. The MVP of that contest, Oregon, Big Ten champions in year number 1. Tez Johnson certainly was a big part of it. Now, he was also a big part of the building block, really, of Dan Lanning's Oregon. Tez Johnson, transferring from the Sun Belt Conference, transferring from Troy, was a part of the first transfer class for Dan Lanning. And when you kind of name off some of these names, these guys are the building block of the future of what's really launching Oregon to this next stratosphere. Jordan Birch was in that class. The late Kyrie Jackson was in that class. Trayshawn Holden was in that class. Nico Reed, Ajani Cornelius, Evan Williams, who's playing in the NFL, Tysheen Johnson, Nyshad Struthers, starters across the board. There were really good, and many more, there were really good players to really kick off the Lanning era, because when you're a new coach and you want to kind of form the roster in your image, you need to bring in your type of guys in the portal. And in year 1, he certainly brought in some really good talent. Tez Johnson was a part of that class. Now, when you look at the NFL future for Tez, there may be a deterrent, of course, with his size. Once again, we talked about it here just a little bit ago. 5'10", only 160 pounds. But man, when you have the speed that he does, when you have the ability to make guys miss in space like he does, I think he's going to find an NFL roster. You know, the first kind of comp, or the first guy maybe that popped into my head, remember Dante Hall from the mid-2000s of the Kansas City Chiefs? 5'8", 187 pounds. He was a fantastic returner. Set Kansas City up with a lot of great field position and certainly put some points on the scoreboard by himself. I could see Tez Johnson being that return type. I could see him being in that role and then playing, you know, that third receiver role, fourth receiver role. You could even go down to like a fifth receiver role, right, where you come in certain situations in the pass game and they utilize your speed in a certain package to get you involved, right? So I think when you can run as fast as you can, as Tez Johnson can, I think he's going to find his way onto a National Football League roster. But as time in his career certainly goes by, and certainly leading up to the draft process, a lot of questions are you going to be able to have longevity at the professional level weighing 160 pounds? All right, so thank you, Tez, for all that you have done for Oregon Ducks football and the last two seasons and making these offenses as good as they have been. Now it's time to get into the good stuff. Now it's time to look to the future of this Oregon Ducks passing game. You're going to lose Tez Johnson, and you're going to lose Trayshawn Holden. So now there's a lot of questions. This is a big position group for the Oregon Ducks. Okay, how are you going to be able to backfill these roles and keep up the production that the Oregon Duck faithful are certainly used to? I think the Oregon passing game is really going to be focused on Evan Stewart, right? If he indeed comes back. I certainly expect him to come back and be the number one guy for the Oregon Ducks next season. And then tight end Kenyon Sadiq. I think Kenyon Sadiq is going to be a big part of this offense. I think with those two guys specifically, you can do so many different things with them. Right? Kenyon Sadiq, you can get him involved. We've seen him involved in the run game. We've seen him line up in the slot, the traditional tight end position. You could probably put Kenyon Sadiq out wide. He's such a matchup problem. I think he's going to be one of the best tight ends in the Big Ten next season. And then you look at a guy like Evan Stewart, right? He's got a frame where you can put him in on the inside. You can match him up against the slot corner. You can put him certainly on the boundary. Look what he was able to do in that October 12th game against Ohio State, where you put him out wide and he can certainly beat you over the top. I just send him in motion, put him everywhere across the football field, get the best possible matchup. But then what happens after Evan Stewart at the wide receiver position? That's what we got to break down now to be able to fill this production that Tez Johnson is leaving behind. Let's look at the veterans. Let's look at the veterans right now. Gary Bryant Jr., you look at Justice Lowe as maybe some candidates to fill in for Tez in that slot position. Now, Gary Bryant Jr., when he came out of USC, he was a burner. He's gone through some injuries. Maybe he's certainly lost a step a little bit. He doesn't pop really for me. Justice Lowe doesn't really pop out for me because, hey, if there's one thing that Tez Johnson did, he certainly popped. He certainly popped. Like, Justice Lowe is fine, 21 catches, over 200 yards last season, but I think where things really start to pop is when you look at these young guys, these guys that have been recruited out of high school since Dan Lanning has got here. How about these guys, a couple of guys that were freshmen on the roster this season, Jeremiah McClellan and Ryan Pelham, both like top 100 guys, high 4-star type of talent. It seems right now that Jeremiah McClellan has an edge over Ryan Pelham, right? And maybe some of these where games were getting away from the other team, these garbage time situations, McClellan was seeing the field on offense over Pelham. McClellan had 3 catches for 24 yards this season. Pelham didn't have any catches, and he had that muff punt. I think that's when Tez Johnson was injured. They needed to backfill that punt returner spot, and it didn't go so well the first time out, certainly for Ryan Pelham. Both guys have frames that can certainly work out of the slot. McClellan 6 foot 190, Pelham standing at 5'11 and 170 certainly as well. But we talked about we're going to talk about really Tez Johnson, getting ahead of myself, and how they can really fill in that slot position. But we also need to talk, and I think this all kind of circles back, and it all certainly connects together. But we also need to talk how you can fill in with Trayshawn Holden as well. I think a big part to the success of Oregon next season is going to be, what is the other side on the boundary of Evan Stewart really look like? I think it's very important for Jerion Dickey to step up into a bigger role. Not saying he has to be the starter. Not saying that he has to have 1,000 yards and he has to be this big-time guy, but this is a 5-star kid. I know he kind of battled some injuries, I think, later on in his high school career. But, my man, maybe the college career hasn't gone as anticipated, certainly so far. But I think he's a big player that needs to be able to step up outside on the perimeter as well. Kyler Casper is another one. He was really involved in this offense, and then he got hurt towards the beginning of the season. That's where you kind of saw Justice Lowe really slide in, where maybe otherwise you would have seen Kyler Casper if he would have been healthy a little bit later on during this season as well. So I think those are guys that really need to be able to step up. So your Jeremiah McClellans, maybe a Justice Lowe, steps into that slot role to where Tez Johnson left off. Now, we can talk about all of this, but I think there's one guy that this coaching staff, Dan Lanning and Will Stein and Junior Adams, that they really want to see come in and fill in that slot role, and it is Mr. DeCorian Moore. It is DeCorian Moore. I think that he is a big part to what this Oregon passing game and this Oregon offense is going to look like in 2025. 5'11", 182. If you've watched the film on him in Duncanville, if you saw that punt return in the Under Armour All-American game, you know what this kid can do. And you know that he can be a weapon. And you would love to have Evan Stewart on the outside. You would have to love whoever it is kind of replacing and filling that other void on the outside at the other position. And you would love to have DeCorian Moore in that slot, working on the middle of the field, using his speed, using his athleticism that we saw on tape, and being a big part of this offense from the word go. He's an early enrollee. He's already on campus in Eugene, Oregon. I think that's a big part. If DeCorian Moore can step in right away and be a big-time target for Dante Moore, I don't think we're going to have to wait. More. Oregon fans are going to want more, plenty more, in 2025. So if he comes out and he hits the ground running, and you have Stewart, and you've got DeCorian Moore, and you've got Kenyon Sadiq, and Jeremiah McClellan steps in, and maybe Jerion Dickey takes a step up on the outside, then all of a sudden you're feeling very confident of what this Oregon offense is going to look like. They're shopping in the transfer portal a little bit for a receiver. Don't anticipate them taking more than one wide receiver. They do not need to take more than one wide receiver. Need to develop this young talent. Get that young talent on the football field. Those are my thoughts. What are your thoughts on the matter? Who do you think is going to be able to step in and maybe fill the void of a Tez Johnson? Fill the void of a Trayshawn Holden? Leave all of those thoughts in the comments below. I'm Ted LeBrew. This has been That Show Out West.